Good morning and good evening to everyone who's taken the time to tune into our ongoing series of special topics here talking about Asia Pac. And we thank you for chiming in and taking time today. The subject today in our ongoing series is called A Market Analysis of Clinical Research in Asia Pacific. I'd like to first talk about the two people that are going to be presenting today. First, we'll introduce Dr. Christophe Tournier, who is the founder and CEO of ClinActis. And Dr. Tournier has been in Asia Pac for more than 20 years. He did his original training as an infectious disease physician in France, spending 3 years at the National Medical Research Institute studying anti-HIV products. From there, he went on to work for an American biotech company in an HIV area before moving over to Asia for one of the large global CROs and one of the large pharma companies as well. So he's worked for Sanofi, Parexel, and Pharmanet over the years and gained a very good deep domain perspective of how to do clinical trials in APAC from the major countries such as Japan, China, and India, but also in the second tier countries all across the spectrum of that region. So we thank him for being here today, and he could answer questions at the end. I will go through the presentation. Quick background on myself. I have more than 40 years experience in the pharmaceutical life science space. I was one of the first individuals to actually start a contract research organization, or CRO, back in the early 80s. And I built a company from basically 3 people up to about 400 or 500 people, covering Asia, Europe, and the United States. I sold it 10 years after growing it and held a series of different positions, executive management positions, one being the head of president of Dendrite Clinical Research Group, which managed the EDC and adverse event reporting for some of the major pharmaceutical companies across the world. Then I became the general manager of First Consulting Group, which one of the largest regulatory compliance software companies. Then with Copernicus IRB, the largest independent IRB here in the United States. And finally, as the head of business development for West Coast Clinical Trials, a leading clinical pharmacology unit here in the United States. So what I'd like to do now is just go over the agenda. The agenda today is going to talk primarily about Asia, is at the center of our discussion. We're going to talk about perceived risks and positive outlooks of doing clinical trials in Asia or APAC. Look at setting up clinical sites, how best to do that and where to do that. Talk about very important, what we would call smaller details that are critical, such as logistics, the importation of drugs, and dealing with those governing bodies, dealing with drugs and biologic samples, getting them in and out of the country, and dealing with shipment, things that are temperature sensitive, and things of that nature. And finally, we're going to end with the importance of using or working with a regional CRO because of the importance. We're going to look at a project management and having local CRAs, okay? Just from a logistics standpoint too, I'll go through the presentation today. At the end of this, then I will take some questions and answers, as much time as we have allotted to do that within this 1 hour period. And then we will, whatever answers we do not get to or questions we do not get to, we will have those written up and sent back out to you within a 48-hour period. So I just want everyone to know that from a logistical standpoint. So with that being said, let's start the webinar. So let's talk first about an analysis of the emerging talent looking at APAC. I mean, people, I think, in general here in the United States and Europe were shy to go to Asia to do clinical studies. And there's been obviously issues overseas in terms of quality. When you look at countries like India and China, two big, huge marketplaces. But people have been doing clinical trials in Japan for many, many years, and it establishes one of the three largest pharmaceutical marketplaces in the world. But we want to talk to today a little more about is looking at what we call the second and third tier countries within Asia that have grown immensely and have very high quality, and where the government themselves has gotten behind these countries to support clinical research because of the importance of it. And these emerging markets in Asia-Pac were countries such as Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam. We expect substantial growth in these areas. I would say that South Korea and Taiwan and Singapore are the three highest and closest to the United States in which clinical research is conducted in the same manner and the same quality. This next slide just gives you a quick breakdown of the Asia-Pacific drug discovery market by country for the next 10 years going forward from 2016 to 2026. And the takeaway from this slide is obviously that the China-Japan marketplace continues to grow exponentially because of the market size of companies wanting to get in to sell pharmaceutical products. But in doing clinical research, you'll see that the last bullet here, which is RO APAC, where the rest of APAC is growing substantially as well. And when you add South Korea and Australia into that marketplace, it becomes formidable in terms of pharma companies and biotech companies spending money to do clinical research because they have that population, that naive population, or that disease population, or that therapeutic area that people are looking for. And as long as the quality is there, the FDA, the EMEA is accepting data on a regular basis now, and that has evolved over the last 10 years. Well, let's look at the pharmaceutical market as a whole. So IMS, which is the standard in evaluating pharmaceuticals around the world, has shown that it has increased from 2012 to 2016 as an example, up to $350 billion, with a quarter of that, or 80 billion, coming from China. This represents 30% of the 1.2 trillion global pharmaceutical market. But what we want to look at here too is outside of Japan and China, where else can we go to do good quality ICH, GCP type clinical research? So there's two markets that have emerged outside of Japan and China and India. That is what we call the first and second tier. These emerging countries in Asia Pacific can be divided into two tiers. The first is made up of Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan, because they're the most experienced in clinical trials for the longest period of time. They have the most developed infrastructure in terms of physical hospitals, new, modern, large infrastructures. They have a great regulatory setup process. They do both medical care and high use of technology. And the sites in these countries work as part of a centralized healthcare system with high quality facilities and investigators. We'll talk more about the investigators later on. The second tier includes Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. The clinical research environment for this group is less mature compared to the first tier countries, but is steadily progressing and offering good quality research at a significantly lower cost than the US and Europe. And not only a lower cost than US and Europe, these second tier countries offer less cost than the first tier countries of places like Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan. So let's look at some of the first and second tier things that I mentioned to you about investigators. Many of these investigators in these countries received their training overseas. So they were trained in the US or they're in Europe. And they have a sizable increase in international clinical trials being conducted at a local site. The personnel then there is gaining the experience very quickly. There are large pockets of populations who cannot afford medical care in Asia. And given the opportunity to participate in trial and treatments that would not otherwise be able to do or pay for. So therefore, there are obvious advantages to working in Asia-Pac, such as it presents a cost efficiencies, country development, but also 30% less than Western nations. There is a huge, large, naive treatment patient population. There is a high incidence in both developing and developed world diseases, especially when you start looking at countries in the South, the furthermost Southeast Asia region. And there is much shorter study startup times because of the effectiveness of cooperating regulatory bodies. An average of protocol approval in some of these second-tier countries is about 90 days as compared to a year in China, or a year in Philippines, 6 months in Philippines, a year in the United States, a year in Europe. So you can save a tremendous amount of time, which obviously saves money as well. So let's look at some of the strengths and weaknesses of working in this part of the world. On the strength side, the government is focused on investing in the clinical trial market. So they're committed to it. They know that there is huge growth opportunity and recognition for being part of the global ICH GCP process. The regulatory bodies are moving toward working toward international standards rather than local standards. As I mentioned before, there's a large treatment-naive patient population. Both developing and developed world diseases, as well as regional specific tropical and infectious diseases, exist. There is a very high motivated and talented investigator group of PIs that have done their training in the United States and Europe and come back there to build a name for themselves and their countries. There is a very strong doctor-patient relationship. There's absolute trust in the patient with their physician. And many of these are well-established medical facilities now, well-known. And we know within each country where to go, what facility is an ICH GCP compliant facility that has a built-in IRB process and has government oversight in terms of they've worked with many global clinical trials and the PIs are well accepted. But what are some of the weaknesses, or we could call weaknesses or issues? One is that there is still obviously cultural barriers. Not only cultural barriers within a country, but cultural barriers intra-country themselves with many different provinces, many different speaking languages or dialects. We're still evolving in informed consent. Additional training is required for site staff, which they take on a frequent basis. There are pockets of population without more advanced technology. So we have to look at the disease state that we're treating, knowing that and taking that into effect. Finally, the infrastructure is still developing in some sites within second-tier countries. Next slide. So what are one of the biggest fears, I think, of people wanting to go to Asia to do clinical trials is the fear of questionable data. And yes, there have been issues in China. Yes, there have been issues in India over the last 10 years. So people are sensitive. But when you look at the first and second tier hospitals in the countries that we spoke of, they are growing immensely and quickly and shifting to performing clinical research in these emerging markets. Asia has become more experienced working on these trials. This is providing site personnel, the people that work there, with the opportunity to participate and train in something that is global and being more advanced in the R&D process. Furthermore, international presence in the region is growing, so the skill sets and knowledge of ICH GCP are transferred across the whole region. This exposure, along with the increased audits by the HA, which is the health authority in that country, the FDA and the EMEA, has underlined international requirements that site personnel need to adhere to. Now, many sites in both tiers have worked on hundreds of trials now over the last 5 years, so to speak, where results have been used as part of EMEA and FDA submissions. So when pharmaceutical companies here in the United States or Europe are looking at doing global trials, Asia now is a part of that submission process. And both the FDA and the EMEA want that to happen because of the growing Asian populations in both continents of the world. So it looks at that certain population growth and what is the effectiveness of these drugs on that population. So that has added to the importance of it. Quality is constantly improving across the region, with the quality of data coming from trials in Tier 1 countries comparable to that of the United States and Europe. And Singapore has led the way with South Korea and Taiwan in there as well. Korea itself has put forth good clinical practice legislation in 1995 and revised this to be in line with the ICH GCP guidelines of 2001. The quality of trials in Taiwan has been ranked among the best by worldwide institutions. By 2012, the FDA themselves had conducted 67 inspections in the majority of countries in this region, none of those of which has issued an official action indication, with 29 of these presenting no objectionable conditions or practices at all. This, if anything, signifies that data coming from sites in Asia Pacific are meeting all the acceptable global standards. So how do we deal with underdeveloped infrastructures? Because infrastructures vary greatly between countries and even within regions in the countries. Singapore boasts one of the world's best healthcare infrastructures. Meanwhile, in some second-tier countries, certain provinces can be more advanced than others, so we have to be very particular as to who we work with. So when we're working in Vietnam or Thailand and Malaysia, we look for those sites where the physicians were trained overseas, where they have been audited by the HA, EMEA, or FDA, where they have ICH, GCP processes and training in place, where the nurses have been trained, that they accept MSAs in advance, they have access to their patient databases, and that they have participated in a global clinical trial before that and audited by their own country. So these are key criteria to making sure that these countries and these sites within these countries are acceptable to participate in clinical trials. Now, there's still complex regulations that we have to deal with. So governments in each of these countries have recognized that clinical trials bring additional revenue, which obviously they're very excited about, better medical access, and a higher standard of care for their patient population. By working with the regulatory and ethical bodies to improve processes, they realize then that this will attract more studies. So across most of these countries, the regulatory processes are becoming much more transparent and streamlined. However, in places like the Philippines, for instance, it takes about 6 months to gain approval, as I mentioned before, where the average is 3 months. But since the recruitment potential is so huge, and in long term, what has happened is opens up the trial there will result in shorter overall study timelines and decrease in your total spending. So you look at the pro versus the con. So the pro is that you're going to get more patients faster. The con is it's going to take a little longer to get the protocol approved. So we make those evaluations for you. We help you when trying to do an analysis of country by country of where we should go. It's not only country by country, it's site by site where we should go to do those clinical trials. But key is establishing good relationship with the regulatory authorities and engaging local personnel experience and liaison with them are key to cutting down approval times. What's different in Asia than the United States is that the CRAs, the project management at good local regional CROs have the ability to pick up the phone and speak to the regulatory bodies themselves, where in the United States that can't happen. So when they speak to them and they tell them that they have the clinical development plan, all the laboratory information, all the animal information, the CMC process, the APIs, everything they need to make a decision, they'll give them an exact time period to which they'll approve them. If they do not have a piece of information, they will tell you that and allow that to happen in a very quick period of time of getting that information. The second thing that makes things go faster is that the IRB process and the government approval regulatory process for a protocol are parallel in Asia versus sequential in the United States. So as an example, the first day after you have protocol approval, you can enroll first patient because the IRB has already been approved. So what are some of the perceived risk continuing. We look at investigator motivation. So Asia has a large pool of well-educated, highly motivated, enthusiastic investigators who have conducted studies at reputable institutions in the United States and Europe. So that's where they've done their training. That's where they learn how to do good clinical research, working on NIH studies or NCI studies or anything of that nature. In most countries, it is the institution in Asia that is paid per patient fee. Although countries like the Philippines, it's a part institution and part investigator payment. I think the biggest thing and takeaway there is the physicians that you're working with are not like the KOLs in the United States, that when you ask them, I need 10 patients for this clinical study, they say no problem. In Asia, when they tell you they can get 1 patient per month or 5 patients per month, that's how many patients you're going to get, because there is no over-promising and under-delivering. In fact, we as a company have not missed a recruitment number in 10 consecutive years. And I think a lot of that has to do not only that we know the processes, but because of the importance of the investigators that we're working with. Just look at some of these statistics under recruitment and retention. According to 2012 report from Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, clinical site activation rates in Asia Pacific are one of the highest in the world, with 91% of sites successfully progressing through the study startup stage and recruiting the first patient or first patient enrolled. Not only are site activation rates high, but investigator sites achieve target enrollment levels 107% of the time, making it the top region in the world in this respect. Continuing with recruitment and retention, despite these figures with clinical research activities in this part of the world growing and increased complex protocols, it is necessary to emphasize the importance of patient recruitment. Physicians are highly regarded and patients put their complete trust in the doctors, which works in the favor of recruitment and maintaining low dropout rates. Dropout rates in Asia Pacific are less than 5%, which is much, much better than any other place in the world. 2013 report from the Center for Information Study of Clinical Research Participation showed that Asia Pacific, the prospect of receiving clinical results and regular updates about research during a trial were the top factors for influencing the decision to take part. Further analysis indicated that a significantly higher percentage of trial participants in Asia Pacific were receiving updates on either a daily basis or at least a few times a week, as compared to the US and Europe. Retention strategies are key to success in these regions. What are 5 of those key retention strategies? Number 1, assigning a dedicated study coordinator to each trial subject in order to create familiarity. 2, including personal touches such as birthday cards in pediatric studies for the kids. 3, building in efficiencies. As an example, combining a study visit with other regular visits the patient needs to make anyway. So you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. 4, patient meetings to create a sense of community and reinforce important messages. And 5, weekly phone calls, either if not face-to-face, at least on the phone with them. The same report that we talked about earlier showed a considerably higher proportion of Asia Pacific trial participations rating free procedures, free study drugs, and their relationship with the staff as major motivators to stay involved at a rate of 121, 140, and 100%, more than their European counterparts respectively. So what are some of the things at the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, when you're looking at culture and geography? Many people underestimate the large number of diverse cultures, religions, and languages making up Asia Pacific. And companies should incorporate multiple country-specific strategies when preparing to work in this region. As an example, for site interaction, again, there are different ways to communicate, negotiate to ensure motivation. Asian countries can be prone to natural disasters too, such as typhoons and earthquakes. But because of great government assistance in disaster planning, risks are mitigated, where sites are putting source documents in flood and fireproof areas. And this is an essential checkpoint for site qualification and selection. Okay, they're all adopting to Western trends, but some of them faster than others. If we take something such as that's more common here in the United States and Europe, risk-based monitoring, or RBM. In the first-tier countries where source documentation is available and there's a very high level of quality, risk-based monitoring is already being implemented. But when you look at the tier 2 countries, RBM is still evolving at this stage, mainly because source documentation is not always readily available. In Indonesia and Philippines, as an example, it may be possible that some patients may not even know or have their own date of birth or birth certificate. As sites become more experienced in trials, while at the same time receiving continued training, RBM will be implemented, but it may be still a few years away. Patient centricity is really important in the Asian marketplace because patients pay over 50% of their healthcare expenditures out of their own pockets. Therefore, in order for companies to grow and be successful in this market, patient centricity is key and needs to begin at the R&D stage, not later in the drug life cycle. Technology, though, is at the heart of this. So it is the first-tier countries that these activities can currently be maximized. We got to look at the positive outlooks, though. Beyond China and India, the rest of Asia is also very attractive draw for clinical trials. Like anywhere, setting up a study in Asia Pacific comes with challenges, but governments are investing hugely, monetarily and infrastructure-wise, as well as forging strategic relationships with pharmaceutical companies to be creative in a positive and efficient trial landscape. With such a variety of nations in the region, each with different characteristics, finding country or countries which complement a protocol is easily achieved. High population densities in metropolitan areas, coupled with large hospital infrastructures. We're talking about hospitals of the size of 2,000 to 3,000 patient beds. Allow individual study sites to recruit greater numbers of patients more cost effectively, while keeping timelines on target and engaging the highly experienced local practitioners who know the intricacies of the national systems and sites is key. Let's talk a little bit about Singapore, because they really are at the hub of the biotech pharma industry and clinical trials in all of APAC. And that starts with the Singapore healthcare infrastructure. The infrastructure varies greatly between countries and even within countries themselves. The choice of sites depends on the clinical study's complexity, the logistics within that country, the standards of care, the types of treatment. As an example, for phase 1 studies with multiple PK/PD sampling is required, or complex oncology trials where it needs sophisticated diagnostic equipment, the first-tier countries generally should be the place that are considered. But second-tier countries present advantages as well because of their large patient pools, and even if they have less advanced equipment, because it's not needed for some of these trials. Some of these trials examples would be CNS, viral studies, infectious disease, and tropical diseases that you would see in Southeast Asia. But what about GCP certified sites? Although Southeast Asia countries are at a different stage of development, significant advances are being made, and the large increase in GCP certified sites have been established to support clinical research activities. Places like Singapore, Malaysia, and Korean governments, for example, have been taking an active role in investing and building local clinical research networks. As I mentioned before, we only work with sites, and that is developed over a 10-year period where we built a library of ICH GCP compliant sites by all the criteria that I gave previously. Logistics should not be diminished as a very important thing. The importation of drugs and governing bodies. One concern for sponsors is the importation distribution of drugs and biologics into foreign countries, and rightfully so. Dealing with custom agents, and governing bodies can be very challenging. But a regional CRO, a very good and established regional CRO, has local knowledge and their own library to support the shipment of drugs, biological samples through carefully planned and well-managed procedures, especially for temperature and time-sensitive products. With local knowledge and the use of specialist logistics providers, these are local agents to facilitate custom clearance, setting up a regional distribution hub, and careful selection of regional central laboratories, the risk involved in movement of clinical trial materials will be mitigated. This is true risk mitigation. The same holds true for centralized drug depots. In general, the solution we recommend is to set up a centralized drug depot in Asia with or without country-specific drug depots. To better navigate global trade regulations, differences in customs requirement and regulations, we work closely with international drug depots that have set up offices in Asia specifically for the management of centralized trial logistics. Two examples of those would be Zulig or Fisher Clinical Services. In Singapore, for a centralized depot, Singapore is one of the best options, not only due to its centralized geographical location, but also the stringent and carefully monitored drug depots with GMP facilities. Such arrangements allow flexibility in drug movement to support active recruitment sites. And we use tools such as IVRS, IWRS, allow real-time monitoring and recruitment and inventory levels at each site for better management of drug supply versus demand, including expired dates management. And what about drug management? Nevertheless, country-specific drug depots could also be a pragmatic solution to avoid potential delays with regulatory approvals, because that's a part of the process for the approval. You know, getting the drugs in, where are they, all the information about them. An experienced regional CRO will propose the best solution for drug management based on sponsors' requirements, our experience with the shippers, and our local knowledge. The CRO offers country-specific solutions for country-specific requirements. For example, in the Philippines, the import license is site-specific, valid for single import only, and expires in 6 months. So not only do we track the validity of the import license, but also once the current import license is used up, we apply for a new license in advance to ensure that the valid license is always available. In many countries, there is a strict requirement for importers. As an example, the qualification of importers and the type of company performing the import: sponsor, distributor, or CRO. Customs regulations in these countries are also complex and are strictly adhered to by customs staff. Any issues with the shipment itself or accompanying paperwork can result in materials are being held in customs for prolonged periods of time, affecting study startup and completion. Working with a knowledgeable regional CRO who has up-to-date working knowledge of these intricacies, meaning that there's an in-place library, as well as carefully forward planning, will easily help sponsors ensure the smooth running of a clinical trial and, again, mitigate risk. And what about biologic samples? Because more and more people are looking at doing biologic studies across the world now, and with a large population, obviously Asia is a target. So biological samples are both time and temperature sensitive. Temperature requirements can range from ambient to 80 degrees Celsius and may sometimes need to be shipped to a central laboratory within 72 hours to maintain specimen integrity. Global shippers such as TNT, DHL, and World Courier can assist with the packaging, providing packaging materials, i.e. dry ice, and door-to-door shipments. Regional central laboratories have also been set up in Asia Pacific, such as LabConnect, LabCorp, Eurofin, and Quest Diagnostics. The use of a regional central laboratory can reduce time shipment cost, even specimen processing time, while adhering to global standards for specimen analysis. Real-time shipment tracking. To ensure that the specimens are seamlessly received by the laboratory, a quality regional CRO can also assist sites with dummy specimen shipments to verify the transit time, ensure that the sites are well trained to pack and label the specimens, and arrange the courier and complete paperwork required. Not only that, it will monitor the real-time shipment of the specimens to the central laboratory with the use of global shippers tracking systems. It will also arrange for international air transportation training for site personnel on site. As export license requirements differ from country to country throughout the regional CRO will share the local expertise, advise sponsors on the most suitable countries and sites for trials with specific analysis requirements. Again, risk mitigation. So the advantage of working with a Singapore-based CRO. Being based in Singapore, a regional CRO benefits from all the advantages Singapore has to offer as a clinical research field. Singapore is a regional hub for healthcare services and biomedical research science. It has become the biotech capital of Asia-Pac. And then why? Because Singapore is strategically located at the heart of Asia, a market of over 500 million people. It has unlimited access to neighboring markets with a total population of over 4 billion people within a 7-hour flight radius. Singapore offers great opportunities for innovation. Singapore is ranked #1 place in the world for ease of doing business in the World Bank's Doing Business 2011 report. Its world-class research institutions provide a strong science and innovation base to support biomedical discovery, development of activities, and international companies present to Singapore offer abundant opportunities to carry out all their R&D activities. Singapore has established a very solid regime for intellectual property protection versus countries like China, where you don't know what's going to be protected. It has a sound regulatory framework. It is a signatory to the major intellectual properties treaties. Singapore has the 3rd best IPR protection regime in the world, according to the World Economic Forum. While Forbes ranked Singapore #8 for property rights in its 2010 Best Countries for Business list. Again, risk mitigation. Singapore also boasts a formidable workforce that is best described as productive, hardworking, cosmopolitan, English-speaking, and able to understand international standards. Singapore has topped Business Environment Risk Intelligence Report evaluation measure for 30 consecutive years. AON Consulting 2010 People Index ranks Singapore as the #3 place in the world for low risk of recruiting, employing, and relocating employees. According to the World Economic Forum again, Singapore has the best labor-employer relations and the most productive workforce in the world. I mean, it's an incredible statement in wanting and knowing that you're safe and that your people are going to be loyal. Our company has less than a 5% turnover rate for the last 10 years, which is unbelievable in the CRO marketplace. Finally, as Singapore is striving to become the healthcare services hub, this has led to increased services that support biomedical sciences in Singapore and in the region. Singapore is the Secretariat for APEC Coordinating Center for Good Clinical Practice. As such, Singapore has also been the focal point for the development of international standards for GCP in Asia. The advantages of a continued of a base CRO, a regional based CRO in Singapore, a range of factors are encouraging pharmaceutical companies to step up their presence in Asia. Together with the increasing importance of Asia as an end user customer market, growth in manufacturing human capabilities are also provide compelling reasons for companies to build direct or outsource capacities in the region. The majority of pharma companies now have established their regional headquarters as well as their regional clinical research units in Singapore, even though some of them have now established regional offices in China as well. And that's just really that they're forced to be in China because of the size of China and you have to be close to the CFDA. But the truth be known, we put together programs where in cooperation with the CDFA, we can do phase 1, phase 2A trials now in Taiwan, and all that data be accepted by the CFDA in China, saving a company 12 months in time frame and millions of dollars. So there are ways to deal with China without physically being in China. Then the last little statement here says, in order for a regional CRO to compete with the large CROs, the regional CRO has to create a unique business and project management model so as to conduct the clinical trials in a timely and cost-effective manner in Asia, with different regulatory frameworks taking into account the differences in culture in different countries and the international quality standards. What about project management? Project management is a critical part of the studies process. What are some of the key components? The project manager coordinates with any third-party vendor, such as drug depots, as we mentioned before, to ensure product deliverables and timelines are achieved. Oversees global capabilities, systems, and processes to assure efficiency and accuracy throughout the project. Creates a management framework to optimize the skills of functional leads and drives focus on the quality and the efficiency of individual tasks. Follows international risk management process addressing potential obstacles to project delivery. Due to the diversity of languages and cultures within the region, as well as the maximized cost and operational efficiency, the CRO assigns or recruit locally based CRAs in individual country to cover the sites in their respective country. It is critical, and I can't pronounce that strong enough, that the CRAs be in these local countries and have direct knowledge and relationships with the sites that they're covering, from the CRCs to the PIs that they're working with. All our CRAs have a minimum of 3+ years in monitoring and are experts in the following areas. I say 3+ years, we're being conservative. Most of the CRAs that we have are 7 to 10+ years, with again, very low turnover. They must have the development and maintenance of good working relationship with investigators and site staff, as I just mentioned. Having those relationships allows them to know the internal processes, the IRB approval times, and other important things that need to be done, such as the diagnostics, the sending in and out of the PK, the lab draws. All those things are absolutely critical. All aspects of site management to ensure quality of data generated by the sites, resulting in consistently low query levels and acceptable QA reports. Pre-study initiation, routine monitoring, and closeout of clinical sites, as well as the maintenance of study files. Establishment, updating, and tracking and maintaining a study-specific trial management tools and systems, such as CTMS. Preparation of accurate and timely reports. Tracking of clinical trial supplies to make sure that is there on time when the study starts, and accounting for those drugs during the period of that time. Review of CRFs and query resolution in an expedited fashion, including experience with various EDZ systems, such as RAVE or Inform and all the others. SEE reporting process and follow-up of SAEs. Our CRAs have a wide span of therapeutic knowledge. We build CRA groups by therapeutic areas, such as oncology, CNS, antiviral, anti-infective areas, pediatrics. Many of these CRAs were formerly pharmacists, study coordinators, nurses, medical doctors in some countries. All the CRAs have previously worked for international companies or CRO companies. They have a broad range of experience, which enables us to provide exceptional monitoring and site management capabilities to complement the project management and expertise to ensure the delivery of results and quality. A quality regional CRO has been able to build a very comprehensive database of potential clinical research staff interested in joining a regional CRO in all countries across the region. That's why turnover is so low. You keep a library of resumes of people so that as you need to scale that you have them. And the third thing is that you have contractors that may not be full-time employees, but ones that you work with constantly and have been trained under your SOPs that are site-specific to certain therapeutic areas within certain countries, that you keep them at your ready at all times. This is enabled by the vast experience, high credibility, extensive network, as I mentioned, by the management team. The very unique concept of our CRO, which is highly attractive to clinical research professionals in the region. A regional CRO is able to attract top talent in the region because it combines international quality standards and a deep understanding of the region and local staff's expectations. They should require their CRAs to demonstrate proficiency in site monitoring before allocated to a study and mainly assigned to monitor sites in their home countries, such as Vietnam or Philippines or Indonesia or Cambodia, wherever these places may be, because they have the best understanding of local languages, regulations, customs, and business practices. The regional CRO should prepare their CRAs with study-specific training, who are familiar with the local customs and regulatory and training, and that they understand things to reduce investigator burden, improve data quality, and accelerate database lock. Our study startups to study close down are the fastest in the regions in Asia. So what are the secrets to success? They're really broken down into three areas. It's about geography, it's about the people, and it's about the services deliver results. Number one, experience does matter. Regional coverage with local knowledge. Regional coverage means covering all of APAC, but people being local to site in Vietnam and Hanoi that know the CRCs and know the PIs. Knowing which countries to target based on the cost, timing, and the therapeutic area, which is critical to the company requesting a RFI or RFP. We have deep domain knowledge of sites, patient databases, contracts, CRCs, principal investigators. Having relationships does matter. Experienced CRAs who are trained and certified in all ICH GCP guidelines and SOPs, having a trusted relationship with the health authorities. I mean, it's nice that Dr. Tournier, our CEO and founder, has been there for 20 years because he knows every key regulatory person in every single country and can have a personal call with them if needed. Having ICH GCP compliant sites by therapeutic area. So as I mentioned before, we only choose sites that have done clinical trials, global clinical trials, that have been audited by the HA, EMEA, or FDA. These are critical things to choosing sites. And of course, doctors that were trained in the US and Europe. Having databases in place to find patients quickly. We have Excel spreadsheets by how many patients can you recruit by site per month, by country, by therapeutic area. Working with sites that have US and European trained PIs is a critical checkmark for us in choosing sites. Working with sites that are participating in global trials and had audited. In other words, that data had to be acceptable to the FDA and the EMEA. Having a library of site MSA contracts in place and processes as well as country logistics will accelerate study startup. When doing phase 1 trials in virtually every APAC country as part of a global submissions at substantially less cost and time, knowing which sites to go by therapeutic area again and experience PI and patient populations for doing those phase 1 studies. And then it just may mean naive patients coming in that haven't been a part of a grind and churn and burn, same people being used over and over again. Knowing how to accelerate new drug applications in China. And I mentioned that before because we have a process and a model to accelerate that. So this concludes our presentation today. At this point in time, I want to look at a few questions that have been raised. The first one comes from a US biotech company. It says, will the FDA accept a study from APAC for phase 1 PK/PD SAD/MAD study? And the answer is yes. We've done multiple phase 1 PK/PD SAD/MAD studies over the last 10 years, and all the data was acceptable. The key is choosing the best phase 1 sites with experienced PIs and nurses who know how to draw bloods and have excellent PK labs. So that's one of the keys. The second question I have is from a European CRO. It says, can we use patient populations in APAC for EMEA submissions? And the answer is same as above. Yes, again, the key is choosing ICH GCP compliant sites with experienced PIs who have a geographic draw of large patient populations. Depending on the complexity of the trial, certain countries and sites might be more applicable, such as an oncology trial versus a tropical disease trial. We have built networks based on therapeutic areas, level of expertise, patient populations where MSAs are in place for quick study startup. Another question is from a European biotech. It says, what about rare diseases or complex protocols? How hard is it to find patients? The answer is depending on the protocol, it can be challenging. The secret is access to excellent databases throughout all of APAC and the knowledge of where these types of patients may exist. As an example, we may only find one patient per month, but that would require having multiple sites with maybe 7 sites with 1 patient per month would add up to 7 patients, which then can give you the types of statistical numbers that you're looking for. So these patients exist. You have to know where, and you have to be reasonable in terms of the number of patients that you want to meet your expectations over time. So that looks like most of the questions that we could get to at this point in time. As I said previously, I want to thank everybody for coming in, whether you came in this morning or you came in this evening, because we did this twice today. And that anybody's question that we did not get to, we will respond to those questions, Dr. Tournier and myself, and get them back out to you with this slide presentation within 48 hours. And upon that, I thank you and offer you a good evening or a good day. And thank you for coming into our continued series of webinars.